All right, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a packed show today. Starting out, we're going to be discussing student athletes and their ability to now get paid, even though they're competing in a college sport. Next up, we're going to talk about emotional service dogs. I think that is so important in New York. So many people have emotional service dogs. Landlords try and prevent them. Very, very important that we shed light on this issue. And finally, we're going to be talking about Regents exams. I used to take them all the time when I was younger, from the 8th grade up. They bring back a little bit of a nightmare for me, but neither that be it as it may. The question is, should we still have Regent exams? Maybe we don't need them anymore. It's an interesting topic. So stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more coming up right now. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. This next topic is of really incredible interest to me. It has to do with student athletes, and we welcome a good friend of mine, wonderful attorney, Kevin Fritz. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, so let's backtrack about 5 years ago. You're a student athlete going to one of the premier Division I colleges. Someone approaches you. They want to represent you. They want to give you some money. That wasn't allowed. Am I correct?
You're correct. That wasn't allowed. Once a student athlete accepted money or a gift or any type of compensation, it immediately would jeopardize their eligibility to play NCAA sports.
And what would happen if they did accept it in the past? Do they basically forfeit a year, forfeit 2 years, something else? How did that usually work?
Well, there'd be several ramifications. Not only would they forfeit their eligibility, but they would also jeopardize their team's performance in terms of forfeiting wins that the team acquired after the payment was made to that player. So you would certainly have situations where wins were vacated, championships were vacated because one player, usually one of the star players, unfortunately accepted some type of compensation.
All right, so let's fast forward to the New York Collegiate Athletic Participation Compensation Act. All right. Talk to the viewers a little bit about what this is, if you could.
Okay, so similar to other states, New York has now passed a law that prohibits colleges and universities from forfeiting a student athlete's eligibility or determining that they are ineligible or cannot play college sports simply because that player was paid for what's referred to as his name, image, or his name, image, or likeness. In other words, students can now be in a commercial or promote products, receive money, and still play NCAA sports.
All right, so let's make believe that, I'm a high school senior and I'm ready to commit to, let's say, Oregon or something like that. And I'm approached by an agent who now wants to represent me and then get me a sneaker deal. All this stuff, and my pictures are going to go on social media and they're going to market it. That's all fair game now. Am I correct?
You're correct. That is fair game.
Is there any limits, not in terms of what you can do, but in terms of money? Let's start with money. Is there any limit that you can get as a student athlete?
There is no monetary limit, but it is worth noting that some of the larger deals that you read about in the news or the media are really for football players, football stars. Unfortunately, men's basketball stars, I say unfortunately because it hasn't trickled down to female sports yet. So whereas all athletes can now be compensated, it does appear that, at least for now, the larger deals are for football players and men's basketball players.
Now, many times these schools, Kevin, they have their own agreements with particular companies. It could be Nike, Adidas, New Balance, it could be anything. What if your agreement with your own shoe company is not the same as the shoe company that's on the field with the other 20 other students, athletes? What do you do?
Well, that's a problem, at least under New York statute. For example, if the University of Oregon has a deal with Nike, where Nike provides logos and the jerseys for their athletic teams, a student athlete attending Oregon cannot have a separate deal with Adidas because those conflict. So that certainly limits the areas and the sources of revenue for the student athletes.
I was reading your article on this. This is one of the reasons why I was so interested in this subject. It also says there are potential issues may arise if, for example, a student athlete of a New York college endorses, let's say, an adult entertainment establishment or a firearms manufacturer. Who's making the rules for this in terms of what particular industries they can't participate in?
Well, unfortunately, the Act has a broad clause that prohibits the student athlete from entering into contract that could violate the school's ethics or morals. And so you could get into some gray areas where, for example, if a student attends a historically conservative school and then he or she is promoting products that are not in line with that ideology, there certainly could be some conflicts there.
Now, it's funny because it seems like we've went almost completely the other way, not letting them do anything, and now we're letting them do a lot. Do you see problems arising on the other side of this, where the students are taking on certain financial obligations to certain people, and maybe they can't participate on this field because they're too busy marketing the sneakers or doing something else? Do you see a problem with that?
Well, I certainly see that they could be distracted. It also may give rise to a competitiveness, not on the field, but off, in terms of teammates competing for the same, to endorse the same product or for the same advertising spot. And we're just going to have to see how it plays out. You know, nothing is usually goes as smooth as you'd like it to the first time that that a law is passed, but I think this is a step in the right direction.
I'm just wondering if, you know, when these kids are being recruited, if the coach shows up now with an agent, or if the coach shows up with somebody who could let them know, listen, you can make a lot of money here. Not only, you know, if you come to my school, but I'm going to hook you up with Agent X, and Agent X can really, you know, make a lot of money in this deal and that deal. Will that happen as well?
Well, what's been happening at these larger schools is the alumni base, or the boosters, who previously would donate money to the athletic departments directly. They are now forming what are referred to as collectives. They're pooling money from the alumni and then setting up the high school athletes, who are then still recruits, for these NIL deals in order to attract them to the school. And one coach of a local college that I spoke to, he expressed concern about that because there's less money now going to athletic departments from those boosters, because now those boosters can target specific athletes that they want to attract. And in turn, the athletic departments have less money to distribute to all the sports, including
all the other smaller sports, right? They don't have to spread the money around. Final question, we don't have too much time. Put your crystal ball out in front of you. Where do you see this in the next, I don't know, 2 to 5 years?
Hopefully in 2 to 5 years, there's more regulation in terms of collectives that go overboard in terms of enticing student athletes to accept certain monies, penalties for violating the rules, which there are none, in the Act. And hopefully the money will trickle down to the tennis players, as you referred to, and to our female athletes as well.
Listen, Kevin, sometimes some of the viewers have questions. You have anywhere we can reach you if they want to reach out to you on this type of subject or anything?
Yes, absolutely. You can always email me at kaf@msf-law.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And we can also set up a phone call, and I'm happy to provide any guidance I can.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Kevin Fritz, I want to thank you very much. Be well, and hopefully you'll come back in the next couple of months, give us an update.
Thanks again for having me.
All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has much more right after this. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today Christina Asbee from Disability Rights New York, going to be discussing service animals, emotional support animals. Christy, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I think this is such an important topic. I was mentioning to you off camera that, you know, I'm on the board of my building in Manhattan, and we constantly discuss dogs and service animals, and how the law always seems to be changing in some respects. Maybe you could give us a little bit about the historical need for service animals and why it's so important.
Yeah, service animals have been around as an accommodation for some time now. Um, in the mid 20 teens, the Department of Justice put some clarity on the regulations that permit service animals, and they gave us more guidance to work with, and we learned a little bit more about how people who need a service animal can access the service animals and where they have access to and what's reasonable. So we have a lot of guidance. There's a lot of litigation now that speaks about this, and we're at a place now where, in the context of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we know we have a pretty good understanding of when people can access their service animals. That's in employment, the employment context, the government context. So anytime you're going into a government program, you're going to a park, you're going to a library, you're going anywhere where the government is funding the program, you can have access to your service dog. Also, when you are going into what's called a place of public accommodation, meaning a business open to the public, you can also have your service dog there.
So but now there's a difference between a psychiatric service dog and an emotional support animal. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are. And service dog is that term. The term is actually service animal. That term is legally defined, and that's what the U.S. Department of Justice has defined under the Americans with Disabilities Act, to be very clear. And that is an animal that is a dog, or in very rare cases, a miniature horse, that is individually trained to perform a task or service for an individual who has a disability, and that person is generally the handler, what's called the handler, the person that has control of the dog. The dog is housebroken. It does not cause a nuisance. It does not sniff or bark or in jump or in other ways cause problems for people around that service animal. A psychiatric service animal is a service animal. There's no difference. It's just the tasks that it performs are related to a person's psychiatric disability, mental illness, PTSD, severe anxiety, agoraphobia, something of that nature. It's just a dog that's trained to provide services for people with those types of disabilities.
Now, there are certain animals that we know now would not be considered to be service animals. Am I correct? Could you tell the public a little bit about what's not included?
Yeah, emotional support animals, they also have a legal definition. Emotional support animals are they might not amount to service animals. For one, if an emotional support animal can be any type of animal. Emotional support animals are animals that provide comfort for a person. They're not performing a task for a person. Emotional support animals don't have to be trained. They have to be well behaved if they're going to be in a housing setting. An important distinction between emotional support animals and service animals is that an emotional support animal is only legally protected in the housing context. So you're not going to go out into the community with your emotional support animal. For example, if you have a cat and you have identified with your medical provider that cat is providing you some sort of emotional service and comfort to help you with your disability, but it was otherwise a pet, but you've elevated that to be a emotional support animal by working with your medical practitioners, then in the housing context, you could have that cat. And you have a legal right to that cat. Now, if you take that cat into the community only on a voluntary basis, would a, for example, place of public accommodation like a grocery store have to let you in with that cat? Legally, they don't have to let you in with that cat.
They don't have to. A lot of people don't realize that. Is the law changing now to expand the rights of those who have disabilities, who need emotional support, and need service dogs or psychiatric dogs?
There is no talk that I know of in the federal government or in the state that is specifically looking to expand a person's access to an animal other than a service dog, a service animal. There has been some communication at a city level in New York City that really hasn't, to my knowledge, manifested into anything regulatory or anything legal in nature, unless it's within the housing context. And again, ESAs are, only protected. ESAs, being emotional support animals, are only protected in the house, legally recognized in the housing context.
Have you seen abuse of in this particular area? Have you seen individuals who are claiming that their dogs are emotional support dogs that really aren't emotional support dogs? This is always a discussion we have at the co-op board. We always wonder, or people who want to bring their dogs onto the plane, where is the abuse happening and how do we stop it?
Yeah, I don't think that there is widespread abuse, mainly though, because when people come to our office, it's because they have a disability. And just for some background, I do disability rights advocacy, and I have a focus on service animals. Our office, Disability Rights New York, we have a general focus on assisting people who have disabilities with their disability related needs. We do receive a lot of calls where landlords, for example, are refusing somebody's access to their animals, whether they're service animals or ESAs. We do not see the abuse. We actually, there may be anecdotal information that we hear of through landlords. Largely, though, it's uncredible information.
That's fair. But where does somebody reach you if they have a question as to whether or not they could qualify for an emotional support dog or service animal?
Yeah, well, certainly anybody can contact Disability Rights New York. The best way to get in touch with us to see our information is online, www.drny.org. However, I will say that we're not we do not decide whether an animal is or is not an emotional support animal or a service animal, although we can help you walk through the process to make that determination.
I think that's very important to our viewers, because I think many people find themselves lost in this area, and certainly they appreciate you coming on and giving some really, really good advice on the topic.
Yeah, one important distinction to understand is that there are no certifications that have any legality to them for either service animals or emotional support animals. So if a housing provider, for example, is asking for a certificate for the animal to have that legal designation, the inquiry can stop right there, quite frankly, because that does not exist. It's a process that is carefully laid out in the law, and one thing that is not required by the person that has the animal is a certificate. It's just not required.
First, I want to thank you very much to Christina Asbee from Disability Rights New York for coming on, and hopefully you can come back in a couple of months and give us an update. Yes,
I'd love to come back. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this. All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today Juliet Eisenstein from Advocates for Children of New York. Juliet, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects as I was growing up, and that's the Regents exam. Full disclosure, I grew up in a New York City public school system, District 26, and every year from 8th grade on, I had a Regents exam, and I had the Barron's book. Brings back some really scary memories for me, because that's one big test that you had to learn to take when you were only I don't know, 12 years old. But anyway, it's not always such a great thing, the Regents exam. And today we're going to talk to you, Juliet, a little bit about the exam and as it exists today and what your thoughts are about the exam. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, as I mentioned, I did not grow up in New York, but I've taught in New York City high schools in the Bronx. And, you know, something I've seen both directly through teaching and now through my work representing students in the system is that these high stakes exams are directly correlated to dropout rates and actually don't do a great job of preparing kids for life after high school.
Now, are these kids, are they nervous? Is that why they don't take the test? Are they just not prepared? Is it that they don't take the test? And the last one is, and that has a corollary to not being prepared, did they not go to class so they don't know how to take the test? So, because they're all meaningful questions, I think.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great questions. And I think that is a lot of the critiques we hear when we advocate for, you know, either getting rid of Regents or removing them from exit requirements. And what we've seen, I particularly work with a lot of students who are English language learners and students with disabilities. And especially during the past 3 years of the pandemic, students, learners, they have different ways of showing that they've mastered standards, and they also have different ways of taking in information. And the Regents exams are not really an all-encompassing, comprehensive way that students can demonstrate that they've mastered material. You know, it's a lot about memorizing what's in a Barron's book and, you know, being able to put that into a very short amount of time and, you know, multiple choice questions.
I took a bar exam. It was like memorizing the phone book, and I had to spit it all out. That's 3 years worth of law school in a 2-day, 8-hour-a-day exam. A lot of it is just memorization. But I had to go to class to still get me to the point where I could be ready to take the bar exam. I guess what I'm saying is, how are we going to measure how well a child knows a subject without an exam?
Yeah. And I think what I'll start with is, you know, during the past 2 years of the height of the pandemic, New York State actually canceled their Regents exams. And so students were forced to demonstrate their learning through their coursework and showing that they passed their coursework. And even if Regents exams are not required for graduation, students still need to pass their classes. They still need to go to their classes. They still need to be able to demonstrate their learning. You know, what we're arguing is just that these high stakes exit exams are not doing anything additional for them to demonstrate their learning. Research shows that they're not correlated to students being more ready for college or their careers. And in fact, they lead to dropout rates. So, you know, the question becomes, why are we creating barriers to high school graduation when these exams don't actually meaningfully prepare students?
I'm no fan of standardized tests. I get that. But every teacher is different. You had your tough, listen, my son has a couple of tough teachers, and I'm not going to mention them on this show because who knows, they may be watching. But he's got a couple of teachers that are a little bit easier. You have to expect that the type of teacher you get is going to influence how well you know the curriculum. One teacher might say, oh, he mastered the curriculum. And another teacher in the same subject who had the same child might say, he really did not know what he was doing. You have very, you know, two different spectrums. How do you resolve that, Juliet?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And probably everyone who's watching this has been in school at some point in their lives. And I think you could argue the same thing. Teachers are not, you know, necessarily equally preparing students for Regents exams as well. But I think that there are a wide array of other tools that we can use to assess students. So there are certain schools in New York City that are performance-based assessment schools. So they require portfolios for students to create in order to demonstrate their learning. We've also seen models in other states where students are given access to work-based learning opportunities. And those are actually they're given credit for those experiences. And those are actually directly correlated to ensuring that these students are successful in their post-high school lives. So we've seen a variety of different models where students can demonstrate their learning beyond a high stakes test. And, you know, that's really forcing them to dig into the curriculum and to use a wide array of different learning pathways to show their math standards.
The organization seems to be arguing, I don't necessarily disagree, that there would be a higher graduation rate if there were no Regents exams? How do they know that?
Well, I think what we can certainly look to is data from the past 2 years of the pandemic, when graduation rates across the state increased, when Regents exams were no longer required. And, this doesn't mean that students are no better prepared for college or their careers. It merely means that these high stakes exit exams were posing a barrier to many students who had already demonstrated their mastery of standards through passing coursework, and now are able to get a diploma and show that and take those next steps in their lives.
Where are you getting pushback from? I mean, I'm giving you a little pushback because that's what I do. But where do you find you're getting some of the pushback?
There's, of course, whenever there's advocacy, there is pushback. And I think something that I've heard a lot is, well, if we don't have Regents exams, we don't have a uniform measure of assessing students. And I think something that myself and people who are pushing back can all agree on is that we want rigorous measures to assess students. We're not trying to give students an easy out to graduate high school. What we're saying is that the Regents are no longer a meaningful way of assessing whether a student is prepared for college and their careers. And we all want students to be able to leave high school with the tools to succeed in life thereafter.
Some final thoughts. We don't have too much time left. Where do you think we're heading? Look into your crystal ball the next year or two. Where do you think we're going to be in terms of the exams? Tell me.
Yeah, so I'm actually part of a statewide commission that is going on right now of about 60 stakeholders who are rethinking graduation requirements in the state. And so by next fall of 2023, I think we will have some, very concrete recommendations for what graduation requirements can look like moving forward. But I think, the thing that I would advocate for most strongly is that we do not require Regents exams in order to high school. I mean that there isn't some sort of assessment throughout students' time in high school as such as needed to meet some federal law requirements, but that we're ensuring that what students are required to do in order to graduate high school is actually a meaningful standards that are giving them the real world skills they need for college and their careers. That might be portfolios, that might be internships. There's a wide array of different platforms that we're looking to.
Well put. I want to thank you, Juliet Eisenstein. I got it right. Advocates for Children of New York. And hopefully you can come back maybe in a couple months and let us know how it's all faring, if you could.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. All right, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a topic or an issue that you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesch. Till the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.